We got a lot to cover, so let's, on your mark, get set.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So, what did we say in 2024? Helpful to take a look back. We talked about the macro landscape continuing to be a roller coaster. Holy smokes. That wasn't wrong. It did continue. And that uncertainty would, in fact, have the consequence of hampering M&A activity. We talked about AI becoming a utility like a railroad. We mentioned government having lots of efforts to oversee big tech, both from the US and Europe. We noted that performance of the public company ad tech revenue growth was improving substantially. And we posited the sort of time frame into this construct of survive, revive, thrive. Survive the depths of 2023, start to come back in 24, and then get set to thrive in 2025. Well, what happened? Let's take a look. Well, we got a few things right? The macro environment did improve. Interest rates came down, inflation came down, and the stock market responded in 24. AI absolutely is table stakes. I don't know who the 6% are that are ignoring AI in marketing, but good luck to you. I believe they are not here at this conference. And yes, revenue growth did continue to be strong quarter after quarter. So, and so far with the publicly announced deal earnings in Q1 of 25, this is looking healthy. M&A activity, which we predicted was going to thrive and come back, is up substantially, over 20 billion in transactions in the last year alone across AdTech and MarTech. And yes, government continues its crackdown, including with case victories against Google and Apple, and they seem to be heavily involved in these prosecutions and looking for wins against big tech. And it's not just the US, it's also Europe as well. So, and of course, the most consequential case for this room, I would think, the ad tech case against Google, we have suggested is actually, if everyone's being honest, has benefits to pretty much every constituency, should Google have to part with their lowest growth, lowest margin, highest headache business. But we'll see how that manifests, of course, across a lot of appeals. We saw new entrants ramping up. Either companies have stepped up their efforts with acquisitions or efforts to do more in advertising, and we've got a group of other companies that potentially could come into this realm. And note that in the case of OpenAI, which everyone's got eyeballs on, just hired Fiji Simo, formerly of Instacart and previously Facebook. So she knows ads. And I think that is going to be telling. So the thrive was happening. Here we are. Here's AdTech, MarTech, and NASDAQ all up substantially, right up and through until February. What happened then? Oh, yeah, tariffs. Which basically threw a monkey wrench into everything. Stock market's down. I like the last 2 weeks, but it really did throw a wrench into everything. And let's think about what the impact of a draconian tariff regime might be. Yes, there's the shock and awe of the market reaction. Probably the biggest issue is business confidence. With uncertainty, it's hard to make decisions on where to go and where to invest. Ultimately, should this continue, I mean, I'm encouraged by the UK and hopefully China and maybe Canada, home country, yay, elbows up. But, should that not happen, substantial tariffs would mess with the supply chain, disrupt the supply chain, which ultimately may have an impact on advertising spend. Those are all the negatives. The positives, though, to bear in mind is that all these trends that were happening are still there, right? Whether it's AI, CTV, commerce media, the media fragmentation we're going to talk about, that's still happening. So this is sort of noise that's getting in the way. And then the second thing is, every time we have some of these major negative impacts, it actually has the effect of accelerating trends. So we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, so that's a lot about what's happened over the last year. What we really want to focus on for this is where are we heading? As Terry said, these trends are not changing. It's sort of a weird dichotomy right now where there's all this macro uncertainty, and yet within this ecosystem, I think there's a lot of clarity, at least as to what are the critical moving forces. When we put together this presentation, we're always trying to think about what are those forces, what's really happening, and often you end up finding that there's specific key trends within different channels. And as we were thinking about it this year, what we realized is that there's really three core pillars that are impacting the whole ad ecosystem. AI, very obviously, outcomes as AI and outcomes come together, and the last is this media consumption phase where we're both seeing a convergence around formats and a fragmentation around production. And so these forces are very intertwined, but they are really impacting the entire ecosystem regardless of channel. And so we're going to dig into each of these.
All right.
With AI.
Let's talk about AI. So we tend to think of this like a hierarchy, like Maslow's hierarchy, where you've got different levels. So you've got at the core the stuff that we do every day, where like workflow, audience data measurement, and media buying. And so you could describe AI as software that optimizes existing tasks primarily for efficiency. They're making them cheaper. Then you've got the next layer up, that's content, ad creative, and communication, which is, this time, AI is software that optimizes existing tasks, so same sort of thing we've been doing, but for both efficiency and, really, really importantly, effectiveness. Next up is internet navigation. I mean, this has the potential to reconstruct internet navigation. Think about search. You're getting those AI summaries instead of the blue links, and web navigation altogether. Why do you even have to publish to a website if the LLM can find the information? So this has potentially massive disruptive impacts. And then there is what Donald Rumsfeld would call the unknown unknowns. I mean, this is very powerful technology, so there are potentially new tasks that AI can do that we haven't quite thought of yet. And yes, with respect to the LLMs, the major platforms, which heretofore have largely been subscription-based business models, we believe it's inevitable that they're coming to advertising and / commerce because of their massive user engagement, the rich intent signals, the high personalization potential, and let's face it, they've raised hundreds of billions of dollars. They were going to need to monetize all of that spend. And we're already seeing early movers, and I think in the next year, when we're back here next year at DMS 2026, we'll be talking about substantial initiatives of these platforms to launch more of these revenue streams. So in the sort of core functionality, the existing functionality that we're all used to in ad tech, it manifests in two forms, right? You've got copilots, human using AI, and then agents, where agents are sort of more autonomous. And we're going to talk a lot about agents today. By the way, out of curiosity, I'm going to find it ironic how the agents deal with CAPTCHA. I mean, really? You're not a robot? Okay, whatever. All right, so
as Terry said, we sort of think of the bottom layer here. One of the biggest opportunities in advertising is workflow. There's a lot of conversation, broadly speaking, about around AI, about it's not the software TAM that it's going after, it's actually the services TAM. And advertising is an ecosystem that has a ton of services and people. There are often teams that are doing planning, targeting, buying, optimization, reporting. They may be talking to each other, but they're fairly disconnected. They've got experts in each one, and there's lots of manual tasks inside all of that. You can easily imagine a world where AI comes into this and starts to play a major role. It becomes very disruptive both to those teams, but also very powerful in how this works, leveraging agents across this. What's critical here is it's not linear. This is cyclical, right? And this is a cycle we've been talking about for over a decade around how these need to work together and iterate. It was data and identity at the core of what we talked about before, and that's still the case. It's just powered by AI, which makes this incredibly powerful, and it iterates and spins much, much faster, which is where you really get the platform for this. So as we're moving into this, we're all familiar with the phrase, your margin is my opportunity, but increasingly we're moving to your services are my opportunity. And this is an ecosystem that has a ton of opportunity for disruption around that. As I said, data is absolutely critical to AI, and we have been talking about this trend of third-party data shifting to first-party data for the last 5 years as we started to move into this world. And what's the biggest news around data lately? It's that after 5 years of telling us cookies are going to go away next year, cookies are going to go away next year, cookies are going to go away next year, actually they're not. But the fact of the matter is, it just doesn't matter. This trend is not reversing. Platforms have already seen how much value they can get out of first-party data. People are figuring out how to leverage both the data that they actually own and the signals they can capture more efficiently. And so we are still moving in this direction. Now, this would be incredibly hard to do, but AI is coming in at the perfect moment to capture this transition. With shifting towards more probabilistic signals around measurement, ad buying, optimization, AI plus shift to first-party data is sort of perfectly timed together. Without this, this would be a much, much harder task, but it's really creating this probabilistic renaissance. Now, as you move up the sort of hierarchy is where you get into the efficiency and effectiveness, and creative is one that is critical here, right? This is what people are actually seeing. It's one of the most important parts of actually driving the value out of an ad. And AI will obviously play a huge role here. I mean, first, on the production side of things, this has largely been manual. Obviously, with all the generative AI, there is a ton of opportunity here to drive into ads. But even more important is the bottom of the iceberg, right? Where it drives effectiveness. How can you start iterate on creative, make sure that it's matching the context perfectly and the user perfectly in order to actually drive that effectiveness side of things. The other thing we've been noticing is this shift around communications and brands starting to move to where consumers are, and AI will be a critical component to this. So if you think about how brands or enterprises interact with their customer, it's often through all these touch points and other platforms versus paid, owned and earned media, but it's all around search, social, paid, push, SMS, all driving back to one thing, their website. That's the one-to-one place where they can fully control the message and contact to their customer. But that's shifting a lot. So for a lot of newer companies and brands and smaller businesses, where they actually interact with their consumers first and foremost is on social platforms and via messaging. And increasingly with AI, that is an opportunity where brands are able to have a one-to-one conversation where their customers are, collect their information, engage them, give them information, and importantly, in some cases, actually transact. And this is very indicative of the ManyChat announcement we had a few weeks ago, where Summit put $140 million in a minority growth round into this business that is doing exactly this. For millions of companies and prosumers, they are this connection point one-to-one on these social platforms like Instagram, WhatsApp, et cetera.
So the consensus is in. Sometimes new things are shiny new objects, and turns out they don't manifest into something tangible. AI is not that. AI is a game changer. Everyone understands that, I think, at this point. So it's going to fundamentally change the ecosystem. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg went further to suggest that increased productivity in AI could have the effect of making advertising an even larger portion of GDP, of relationships that have been stable for decades now. So it does have transformative potential. And yes, there are some open-ended questions around like IP credit. Who gets the credit for a AI summary that utilizes IP content if they didn't cut a deal with your publisher? Agentic governance, that sort of stands for itself. I mean, these agents are going to be doing a lot of things. How do we control it? We saw that in the early days of algorithmic financial trading. Obviously, there's going to be huge disruption to search and web, and we're going to have to figure that out because a big construct, big revenue streams and business models of many companies, including publishers in this industry, were set to the old paradigm, and that's going to change. And ultimately, this notion of innovator's dilemma, what does an incumbent company do when all of this AI is rising? In fact, there's a narrative that suggests this conflict in ad tech specifically. I've been noting it across LinkedIn posts where you got these AI first companies, David, against the big ad tech incumbents, Goliath, right? And the notion is that these new companies that are AI first are just going to kill the incumbent companies. Yes, they're going to make headways, but I think that ignores probably one of the single most powerful forces in business, inertia.
Yeah, and so we thought a lot about what actually drives success in AI in the space. And so, critically, of course, you've got the AI engine or product, whatever you want to call it, that needs data, right? Data is the lifeblood of AI, so you need those two components. But as Terry said, in ad tech, that doesn't mean anything unless you have actually access to demand and access to supply. And that is critical to actually drive the use of the AI into this. It also feeds data back in, and this is not always taking the same forms. You've got different components of the demand side, whether it's customer data, transaction data, creative data, other KPIs, On the supply side, there are different styles of supply, different signal from different types of supply, different access levels. This is all critical in actually driving how the AI gets leveraged, and again, ultimately feeds back data into this loop. This gets even more interesting when you bring agents into the mix, right? Agents can't do anything unless they're integrated into the ecosystem, unless they can actually touch those systems, turn those knobs, so that is critical as well. And what does that ultimately mean? Well, it comes back to this concept of inertia. It requires trust. If you are going to have an agent running parts of your system, you need to trust that the platform that is running that is doing so in the best interest, that it actually works. And once you have that trust, which is very hard to build, it takes a long time to build, and as we know, trust you can lose overnight. If you have it and you have it at scale, that's where this gets really powerful, because scale provides a lot more data into this ecosystem, and that's what you're starting to see with some of the biggest platforms like the Meta, Google's, or AppLovin, where even at scale, they shifted towards some AI models, were able to re-accelerate growth massively, and in case of Meta, recently started talking about fully just trust us. Give us your bank accounts, we'll give you the outcomes. What we see happening here is AI and these products are absolutely critical, but what is the most exciting part is where you can take it and then apply it to larger rails, and so AI plus incumbents is where this gets very interesting.
So, okay, because of these dynamics, there's no choice but to lean in, right? And historically, companies could either ignore a trend. We've now ruled that out here with AI. So it's either build versus buy, and we would suggest actually accelerating this a little bit. It's build fast or buy fast, because basically, the game is on, the horn has been blown, and you've got to get to market, because if you don't, your competitors will. In fact, we would suggest that AI has the potential to shorten the startup life cycle. Traditionally, you've got build infrastructure and product and sales teams and go to market, and this can take 5, 7, 10, 15, heck, where's Harry Cargman? 20 years in some cases. No, he's doing great. Trust me, you want to be Harry Cargman. But before a company gets an exit, if they're lucky, AI startups can do this in a fraction of the time. And by the way, they will require less capital, right? Implications on VCs, fewer people, and a shortened path to exit, like green bids that we announced this morning. So, the second major paradigm that we want to talk about is outcomes. It's like all the rage, right? Spend any time on LinkedIn, you can't ignore this topic. And it's really, in a relative context, it's outcomes as an improvement on historical proxies. So we believe the era is here. In fact, we're kind of blue in the face. We've been talking about this for over 10 years, this notion of the advantages of migrating towards a performance model that are largely twofold. Number one, you get to mitigate all those problems about fraud and bots and viewability. It doesn't matter if you're only paying for the outcome. Who cares about those issues? So it mitigates many of those issues, number one. Number two, it derives a much better business model when you bring scale and automation together. The operating leverage of these businesses goes through the roof, and we've seen this with companies that have adopted these models. In 2018, at the ANA, we talked about how there's been this sort of gestational change where gamers first sort of understood this relationship between CAC and LTV, and then the app developers start doing it direct to consumer, and we predicted that all marketers eventually will take this sort of more less of a discretionary spend, more of a cost of goods sold approach to performance advertising. And why now? Why is it accelerating now? The changing data paradigm, the advertiser demand, the CMOs are insisting on this, supply necessity, and most importantly, AI enablement.
So a lot of this change really started to precipitate with this collapse of third-party data, or in some cases, the expected collapse. And this forced the change for many of the leading performant advertiser platforms towards new approaches around driving outcomes. If we had those announcements in 2020 and the drop of IDFA in 2020, 21, and 22, that had huge impacts to companies like Meta and AppLovin and Google. But they all quickly reacted with AI and moved towards more probabilistic, deep AI-driven models to deliver outcomes versus just buying on their platforms. And so if you think about what happened here, what is leading this transformation? Well, historically, deterministic was the default, right? This was easy. Performance was bottom of the funnel, last click, MTA type models. It was great for platforms that could do it, but it led to a ton of shenanigans, right? It had perverse incentives, easily gamified, and it wasn't just in general the way anyone really wanted to be done. Probabilistic was always there. The challenge is this was taking large sets of disparate data, building into models, and getting insights and recommendations from it. But it was very complicated, it's incredibly slow, incredibly expensive, and very importantly, it's been disconnected from the daily buying and optimization. Well, that starts to change with AI, right? With AI, probabilistic can move to become a much more fast, accessible, and interconnected component to the media buying process. This shifts things like MMM and incrementality to be far more accessible. That's why you're seeing so many companies popping up around this, and moves towards, instead of insights and recommendations, predictive measurement and predictive buying. And very importantly, as they start to iterate together, and as those iterate together, that's where you move towards predictive outcomes. And that's where we're heading. We are already starting to see some of these lines beginning to blur. So over the last 10 years, there have been pretty distinct lines of companies that are data companies, those that are measurement, and those that are doing media execution. But increasingly, as companies have looked at how are they leveraging their data, realizing how much margin there is to be not just at the post-bid after the transaction, but actually moving that data and signal to the pre-bid and the predictive side of things, we've seen a ton of companies move this way. Both execution platforms looking to add more data and measurement companies moving closer to optimization. Just in the last 6 months, we've seen a number of deals that are indicative of this. Trade Desk acquiring Sincera, Experian, which has been on the data side, acquiring curation platform Audigent and moving closer to media execution. Zeta buying Live Intent that had both media and data properties. And DV acquiring Sybids a couple years ago, moving towards media optimization, and just recently adding Rockerbox to the mix. So broadly speaking, the opportunity here around moving towards outcomes is reframing what the notion of performance means. Performance has always been viewed as this bottom of funnel and focused on things like cheap inventory, actions that are very near term, and deterministic measurement. Well, brand was stuck at the top. That's where you had very high value, awareness focus, and you were reliant on proxies like reach and frequency. What gets interesting here is how we can start to leverage AI and these probabilistic methodologies to actually bring brand signals down to outcomes and start to tie these together, leveraging the sort of predictive nature of these capabilities to allow brand buying to be bought in the same way. Ultimately, what this means, it means you can start to measure impact on outcomes. You can assess what KPIs are predictive. That means brands can shift from just buying eyeballs or audience to actually buying the KPIs and guarantees on certain KPIs that they believe will be predictive to outcomes. It means that ad spend is not just COGS for those that are doing near-term attribution, but actually can shift to COGS for all marketing, and opens up this aperture of what performant inventory is. And this is critical as we see many different channels opening up towards performance advertisers or reframing what advertising is for those advertisers they do have. Also, with outcomes comes a changing dynamic with the CFO and the CMO. CMOs are under pressure to show ROI, and that pressure has only been increasing. This is from an IAB study where 70% of brands are facing that pressure. With outcomes, CFOs and CMOs can actually come together and start to align on how are they best leveraging their marketing and advertising spend to drive business results. So on the multiple channels front, as Terry said, the mobile app space has been here for forever. This is really where they focus, where they grew up. But it's been shifting to other channels. Commerce media, obviously, this is sort of inherent in this channel, has been coming into the fold. And then there's CTV, which is the area which most synonymous with brand advertising. But over the last few years, everyone in CTV has been focused on performance. Both the traditional players like a Paramount or Disney, as well as the digital-first players like Roku and others, and new startups. Everyone is trying to drive performance advertising into this space. So on commerce, look, obviously you can't measure outcomes if you don't see the transactions, you don't see the commerce. That is fundamentally what we're trying to drive with advertising, and is incredibly powerful with the closed loop attribution that comes with those signals. What's really happened here over the last few years is a change in the permission structures where companies that have that signal and have a customer base have realized they're allowed to start advertising, they're allowed to start making money this way. Most of the focus to date has been on the O&O side of things, so actually monetizing the surface area they have with their consumers. And this has driven a huge industry, right? $60 billion in the US alone. But it's not been distributed evenly. A lot of this sits at the head. Amazon, by far the largest. Walmart has done a very good job as well. And then really the rest are catching the remaining $9 billion of spend there. The top two platforms here, they're very focused on sort of owning this from a first-party perspective. They have the scale. They have desires to not just make margin off of selling goods to their consumers, but their goal is to make more money from selling technology to their brands. So they are going in one approach. And then the rest of the ecosystem is in a space where they have all come into this space with a lot of fervor, a lot of excitement, and some of that is starting to fade as they realize how hard it is to be a media company. There's mass fragmentation of these channels. A lot of them have very bespoke measurement. They've got lack of standards. There's low degrees of optimization. They're reliant on third-party tech, although many of them don't want to be, but increasingly they need to be. Ultimately, what we believe is these guys need to start thinking about aggregation. They're kind of like publishers in the mid-aughts. They need to shift and move towards the sort of programmatic ecosystem. And this is even more important as you think about the bigger opportunity here, which is how you taking that data and moving it off platform. Because again, commerce, in order to move outcomes, you need to be tying commerce signal to all these different channels. It's not just on commerce media, it's on the walled gardens, it's in CTV and the open web. And the major players have been doing this. Amazon has done it from a first-party sort of O&O approach. They have their own DSP. They're making big pushes on that side of the house. They've got CTV assets, both hardware and apps. And very interestingly, in the last few years, they've started driving a lot of partnerships with the major social platforms, which is coming at the same time that they're actually competing with them more and more for media dollars, just indicative of how important that commerce signal is. But others are following suit. Some of the biggest players are doing it on their own, announcing new initiatives. But increasingly, that broader platform, there's a huge opportunity to aggregate that data and bring it to bear into this ecosystem.
Yeah, and CTV is also coming into outcomes, and you can describe why with a simple microeconomics 101 chart of supply and demand, right? Think about what has happened over the course of the last few years. You had, with eyeballs shifting towards SVOD, streaming delivery SVOD, you basically had a constriction of supply of ad inventory. That was, potentially great. But then, you had Amazon Video launch, Netflix, Max, all the fast channels. We had a flood of inventory. TV, for the first time, is no longer supply constrained. So out of necessity, we need to migrate the demand curve. More eyeballs, and that's why you're seeing this sort of migration to a much deeper, broader group of advertisers looking for performance. So that brings us to media consumption and those changes happening there as our third and final component. So if you look at one of these eMarketer charts of where people are spending their time, you will note that a big preponderance and growing amount is on the both walled and hedged gardens. And it's historically across social, streaming distribution, and subscription CTV that were largely thought of or consumed in silos and for different purposes. That is changing. They are aligning and increasingly becoming about entertainment that is all ad-supported. Now, it ranges from short form to long form, with some companies like YouTube and Spotify playing across that entire spectrum, others focused in different areas. But again, all of this powered by advertising. In fact, on the short form side, we've talked about these shorts. The popularity of video shorts has exploded, as has super long form podcasts. In fact, this last election was the podcast election, they're calling it, because of the influence of those types of content. And of course, we're seeing crossovers where podcast clips get played as short form. So we're seeing a lot of coalescence here around this new media. In fact, if you think about the use case for social, Instagram is no longer a friends network. It barely is. It's more about an interest graph, not a social graph. Less than 7% of people's time on Instagram is spent in their friends groups. And the UGC has also taken over the living room, YouTube. By far the dominant player according to the Nielsen Gauge results in terms of share of viewing by platform. In fact, so much so, YouTube views the living room, the TV is now the primary device for delivery of its content, which is a manifestation of what we talked about many years ago. I think I was on stage with Sheila Spence talking about how we're going to see a recategorization of what was considered sort of TV as you move due to the supply constraint component of it, and adding these other delivery platforms of premium video.
So, obviously the time and intent and attention on all these channels has driven massive amount of ad spend, no shock there, but just these channels, right, these social platforms and distribution platforms, CTV, are over $300 billion in ad spend today. But what's critical to remember, especially as these are converging, is what's actually underlying that, right? As we move to all of these being video entertainment, the basis of a ton of this is creators, right? And so that's where we're both, sort of merging around format and yet fragmenting around production. On Instagram, the top 5 accounts have 2 billion followers. There's obviously millions of people, billions of people on these platforms. On YouTube, the leading players actually even on a weekly level have more scale than any TV show and some of the biggest TV shows for the entire year. So including live sports. So these are very powerful platforms. And yet, when you actually pull it back and say, well, what are the creators earning? The amounts are way, way down, especially from an advertising perspective. It's only about $22 billion of influencer marketing spend in 2025, despite the sort of magnitude difference at the platforms. Now, historically, we in this room would think of these as walled gardens, right? These platforms have controlled the customer touch point, the customer data, the algorithm, so they decide what they're seeing. But increasingly for creators, they're not viewing these as walled gardens. Instead, these are distribution platforms. And as the form and format that they're leveraging converges, they are working across all of these platforms. And then, as we talked about last year, actually guiding their customers to capture more data and pull them between different platforms. So the dynamic is changing for these players. The creators are also incredibly powerful as it relates to intent, especially for emerging buyers. Gen Z and millennials discover the majority of their products on these platforms. So there's a ton of power there. And brands are paying attention. So Unilever's new CEO recently announced that for 2025, their goal is to be social-first ad model, over 50% on social, and 20x their creator investment. And keep in mind, this is coming from a CEO who was formerly the CFO. So for one of the largest advertisers in the world, this is showing the importance that they think the creator in this ecosystem has to actually driving outcomes. So the problem with creator historically has been that it's really been isolated to the very, very top of the purchase funnel and the very, very bottom. It's sponsored content at the top and affiliate at the bottom. It's massively fragmented. The formats are not traditional. It's hard to compare to traditional media buys. It's bespoke creative every time, so that's very challenging. Services heavy workflow. It's historically was platform specific, so you had Instagram creators, TikTok creators, LinkedIn creators. If you're listening to what Terry's watching, and data was at the platform, not the creator. With AI and with just gestation of this ecosystem, that is starting to change. So just like brand performance, with the creator ecosystem, you're starting to be able to use AI to do better targeting, find how it'll be effective, do better measurement, start to drive the workflow, right? Your services are my opportunity, and the creative is easier to produce, as well as assess and make sure that it aligns with the brands. Ultimately, this means that there's a huge opportunity for the creator ecosystem to start to mold more into the broader paid media ecosystem and play a different role. And for ad tech, this is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. So again, historically, we think of these as walled gardens. Money went to the platforms. The content from creators went there. That's where it was all captured. But as creators become sort of working across these, this is the new area of fragmented media, especially in a time of AI. if we're getting our answers everywhere, but we need to spend our time somewhere, it's largely right now going to be on these types of platforms. And there's a huge ad tech opportunity to start to enable the shift of those dollars increasingly into that space.
So, what are the, that's a lot, and don't worry, all this deck will be published so you can see all the detail at your leisure. What are the implications for the ecosystem of these three massive paradigm? Well, let's see if we can summarize them, shall we? Number one, we're going from change is going to go on hyperdrive. So you kind of got to just sort of get used to that. I know we've talked about that in prior DMSs, but it seems like it's going at a different level at this point. Legacy assumptions out the window. Just, you know, we have to sort of take like a fresh start to thinking about a lot of these paradigms and its implications. At the end of the day, as you can hear from outcomes, this is going to be better for the principals in the ad ecosystem. It's going to be better for advertisers. Hopefully it's going to be better for publishers, the applications of these dynamics, both outcomes and AI and shifting media. It probably is going to have the effect of separating the wheat from the chaff. This has been a needed component to the over-fragmented ad tech ecosystem for over a decade. We need a forcing function to be able to rationalize what is an overly complex space. It'll result in better business models for the winning companies. So separating wheat from the chaff, and then the wheat gets to blow up. And wait for it. Yep. What do we think? Well, we think inorganic growth is going to be key to winning. And I know what you're thinking from an M&A advisor.
Positively shocking.
Exactly, right. But we do believe that M&A will manifest as a critical ability to capture some of these changes and drive your growth forward. So that's our State of Digital 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.